Hello, thank you for watching my channel today. My name is Sarah and my channel is called Your True Shelf. And today I'm going to be filming my wrap up for the month of January. First of all, I just want to say, obviously I've had my hair cut. I'm really, really happy with it. I don't know if you can kind of see all the way around. But yeah, I just fancied a change. I had been growing it and then I just decided that I kind of wasn't happy with it for quite a long time. And then I just decided to cut it short again. So I have, and I'm really happy with it. And it just feels like such a nice change, and also so funny when I ran my hand through my hair and there's like not a lot of hair there at the back. But yeah, I really like it. But obviously I needed to acknowledge that in the video that I'd actually have my hair cut. So excuse me, I'm a little bit so last time I filmed I had like a sore throat and a bit of a cold, and I've just got a bit of a cough left, so I'm still a little bit croaky but feeling fine. So let's just talk about the books that I read in the month of January. So January I read 7 books, so not a bad start. And one of the books which I will talk about was a really big commitment book, and so actually more than one of the books, so I guess 7 is pretty good really. So I read, let's have a look. So from my TBR, I read 1, 2, 3 books from my TBR, so not too bad at all, so nearly half. And then I will go through the rest. So the first one was a reread for me, which I listened to on Audible for the second time, and that was my workbook club choice for January, which was The Pull of the Stars by Emma Donoghue. So when I read this last year, it made my second favourite book of the year. Sorry, not last year, 2021. I have to keep reminding myself that we've actually changed years now. So in 2021 it was my second favourite book of the year, and I don't think I loved it quite as much this time, because I guess because I knew what was going to happen and I wasn't quite sure about the ending either time. So we are following a nurse who is actually, well, she's called a nurse, but she's actually a midwife called Julia. And Julia is working on maternity in 1918 in the Spanish flu epidemic. So she is looking after pregnant women who have the Spanish flu, and she only has about 3 patients at a time, but they're all really sick. And there's nothing that she can do to make them better apart from nursing care, because they didn't have any drugs to give the patients. And she's very competent, more so I'd say than quite a few of the doctors who work there. And she is trying to look after these women as they go into labour. There were quite a lot of obstetric complications in this book, so I would say like trigger warnings for if you're a bit squeamish, or if you maybe like haven't had a baby and you're pregnant and you're not sure that you want to read about obstetric emergencies, then I would just caution you before you take on this book. But we really get to know Julia and the sort of nursing atmosphere in the ward. And then she also has a helper called Bridie Sweeney, who is from a home for sort of abandoned children and mothers who've got pregnant. And she has had a really, really tough life, and she sort of fast becomes firm friends with Julia, and Bridie is a great character. So I still really loved this book. I would say, without giving any spoilers, that the end, there's something that happens towards the end which I was a bit unsure of the purpose of it, because it just seemed a little bit out of the blue. But otherwise I thought it was a wonderful, wonderful book, and I would still highly, highly recommend it. The second thing I read was something off my TBR. This book I asked for Christmas, and because I was planning on reading this in January with Joe, my friend, because we are doing our sort of classics project for the year, and our first book that we chose was The Rainbow by D.H. Lawrence. And we read Mothers, Sons and Lovers last year or the year before, and we really loved it, and we wanted to read another D.H. Lawrence. This one we didn't like quite as much. So this follows 3 generations of the Brangman family. So we start off with the oldest generation, then we, over a few years, we get introduced to the second generation, and then I'd say for more of the time we're with that generation and the third generation. And we're looking at basically the sort of the relationships of between the three generations, and so between the parents in each generation. The things that I liked about this is there is a lot of really good nature writing in here, and there's a lot of just really, really well done writing. And what I would say is the pacing is a little bit odd. So sometimes we will spend 6 pages inside someone's head while they mull over something fairly small, and then another time in the book we will skip over 5 years in 2 sentences, which is a little bit odd. Joe and I felt that it needed a really good edit in places, and also the characters have extremely intense emotions, extremely intense, to the point where sometimes Joe and I got a bit emotionally exhausted by listening to their passionate discourses they have and the arguments they have about things. And, you know, characters who are married can go from like loving each other to hating each other to loving each other, like within, you know, a few pages, and the characters aren't very likable. So we did enjoy this. I think we both gave it 3.5 stars, but it wasn't for me as good as Sons and Lovers. But I would still read more D.H. Lawrence, and it'd be nice to read Women in Love, which is the second book in this sort of companion series. The third one was an audiobook, which I got from Libby. I had BorrowBox. I had put a reservation on it ages ago and it came in, and that was Stone Blind by Natalie Haynes. So this is the first book I've read by Natalie Haynes, and it's actually read by her as well, and she does a great job reading it, I would say. I believe that she has like a comedy background as well, and she does put quite a lot of comic acting into her reading of the story. And this is about Medusa. So it's a Greek myth retelling. It's about how Medusa came to be in the world, and about Medusa's life, and from sort of birth to death, really. And I really enjoyed this, but I was never racing to pick it up again. It's got a lot of characters. So at the beginning, it gives this massive character list, and I thought, oh gosh, like I'm listening to this, how am I going to refer back to this character list? But then, so what I did was I downloaded the Kindle sample, and then I just screenshotted the character list so that I could refer back to it if I needed to. And I would say that it was fine, because the characters, they only talk about them in small groups at a time, so you haven't got loads and loads of characters all together at once. And it was interesting. It was a good story. It was moving in places, but there wasn't that many likeable characters. The gods were funny in terms of like their egos and how they were like fighting with each other a lot. There is rape in this book, so obviously like caution if that's something that, you know, that you would find that you couldn't read about in a book. So yeah, I think I gave this one 3.5 stars again. So it was like good, but I didn't think it was incredible. But I would again read more Natalie Haynes. The fourth book I read was one that I have mentioned already, because this was gifted to me from from Tandem Collective, who have hosted the readathon for this wonderful book, which was Immune by Philipp Dettmer. So Philipp Dettmer has a channel called Kurzgesagt in a nutshell on YouTube, and it's basically explaining different scientific concepts in a nutshell. It's got millions of subscribers, and he's now done this book, which is a guide to the immune system. This book was really, really readable. I found it really fascinating. I found it so fascinating so many times I had to keep stopping and saying to my husband, guess how many miles of blood vessels we have in our body, or guess how this happens or that happens, because it's just so incredible. And I couldn't, like, the amount of fine tuning that our body has, the amount of like amazing feats that our body can do, it's just incredible. Like, I was just absolutely blown away by all the things that our body can do without any input from our brain, you know, from us consciously thinking about it. You know, one of the first things that happens in this book, and it basically says, it does say this on the back, so I'll just read this out. You wake up and feel a tickle in your throat. Your head hurts. You're mildly annoyed as you get ready to head out the door. Meanwhile, just below your skin, an epic war is being fought. And it basically talks about the cells as if they have personalities. Like, it describes neutrophils as chimpanzees with machine guns on cocaine and stuff like that. So it makes you kind of understand the cells a lot more than just giving out the names, and it makes these into kind of epic battles. You can imagine you're watching like a scene from a film, how it talks about the attacks on the immune system and things, and it doesn't just focus on what happens if we get an infection. It also focuses on what happens if our immune system gets it wrong or if it is too active. So it looks at autoimmune disease, it looks at cancer, it looks at the things like when people say about boosting your immune system and sort of breaking down the myths involved in the sort of advertising for boosting your immune system and things like that. And it's really fascinating. And alongside, it's got really, really helpful pictures. So, for instance, this is when it's talking about the gut mucosa, and it's got a picture here of the mucosa of the gut and all the different cells that you find in the gut. But because it's so colourful and because it's labelled really well, that is so much more interesting to look at than if you've just got like a black and white drawing in a science textbook. So it's really gorgeous, and it's also got at the end, so this is the map of all of the different cells in the immune system. It's got like there's arrows between all of them, and it's got like a key to what all the arrows are. So which ones activate which ones communicate with each other, which cells turn into what. So if you sort of think, oh, I'm sure we've come across plasma cells in a previous chapter, but I can't remember what they are, you can refer back to this. And also he does give lots of summaries all the way through the book. So he'll say, like, last chapter we came across this cell, remember this is the one that does XYZ. And so you do get sort of reminders all the way through. I think if he had come to med school and done our lectures in immunology, I would have got it so much more than I got it before this book, because, I've found immunology really hard, and this makes it so much more readable and easy. If he'd written all the textbooks for med school, that would have been even better. I'd really recommend this. If you're curious about the human body, if you're curious about what goes on when we're unwell, or when we have an autoimmune condition, for instance, or, anything to do with science, if you want to read about, it's fascinating. I thought it was really good. And I also, because it was part of a read-along, I did have a community of other booktubers who I was reading it with, and we had a Discord chat. So that was really lovely as well. So that did take up the readathon was over 13 days. So for 13 days I was reading that book, and we had to read sort of 20-25 pages a day, which was fine, but it did take up quite a lot of my reading time this month. So I think it's good that I still managed to read 6 other books apart from that one. The next one, I saw Heather from Soggy Expat Book Nerd talk about in her favourite graphic novels of the year, and I thought I really wanted to read it, and I asked my library if they would buy it because they didn't have it in their catalogue, and they very kindly did buy it. And this is called Quiet Girl in a Noisy World, an Introvert Story by Debbie Tung, and I absolutely loved this. It was so good. It's all in black and white, but I loved the illustrations. It is what it says on the tin. So the character is Debbie Tung. She is the main character in the book, and it's all about how she feels as an introvert, and something that I could relate to loads of the stuff in this book. How, for instance, so it starts just with she's at university and she has a partner who she gets married to and stuff, but there's just so many things in here that, because her husband is an extrovert, and it's about him understanding her understanding him as well. I was just trying to show you some of the artwork. So that's kind of what the artwork looks like. Let's see. But I find for myself, I'm not that socially awkward. Like, I can make conversation with people, but if someone says, like I was saying to Heather when I was telling her, a word I really hate is networking. So if I'm at a course or something and then someone's like, oh, let's do some networking for half an hour afterwards, I'm kind of dying inside thinking, oh my God, I don't want to go and talk to a load of people that I don't know, and having to like think of what I want to say, and I just don't want to do that. But if I'm at some sort of thing where there's people I don't know and it's kind of not a forced environment, I'm happy to chat to people I don't know. But one thing I really related to in this is like the social stuff. So for instance, she's quite happy doing something with a small group of people. Like she'll say, okay, I'm happy to like study with a group of friends at university, and then they'll all say, oh, let's go out from here to the pub, and she's thinking, okay, if I have to, I can probably just cope with that. And then they're like, oh, someone's having a party, let's go to the party. Now for me, I mean, I do like the pub, but for me, I don't like it when something like that is like sprung on me and I don't really want to do it, and then I don't know how to get out of it, and I feel kind of out of my comfort zone. And I've always been like that. I don't really like it when plans change and I wasn't prepared for them. And there's just like how she talks about how she has to recharge after she's been around a lot of people. She just wants time by herself. She wants time with her books and her tea and just being like cozy at home. And I definitely relate to that as well. Like, I really like my own space, and sometimes if I'm having a day where I'm not feeling great, then I just want to be on my own, and I'm happy being on my own. So I did relate to that as well. And yeah, I thought it was great. I really, really loved it. And like I say, hard relate to a lot of the stuff in here. I then read another 2 books off my TBR, which I'd had on my Kindle for a really long time, so that's positive. One of them was called 1500 Miles from the Sun by Jonny Garza Villa. This book is a YA book, and it's a queer love story. It's really lovely. It's about a boy called Jules who is at the age where he's about to go off to university. He's in his last year of school. I don't know really, high school. That's what you call it in the States, I think. It's his last year of high school. He's about to go off to college. And he's gay, and he comes out by accident. Like when he's drunk at a party one night, he like puts it on Twitter that he's gay, and he forgot that he did it in the morning. But his friends all know, and his friends are super supportive and lovely, and his dad is really homophobic, and his dad is like, you better not be gay, you better not be. And so he's always having to mask at home and not be his real self. His dad hits him as well. So it's all really like, his dad's like, you have to be a man's man, you know, you have to be really macho, and like, he just does not want him to be gay. And so he's finding it really hard. He can't wait to go off to college. And then he meets this guy on Twitter called Matt. And Matt is Vietnamese American, and he lives in LA, which is where Jules is hoping to go to college. And they form this really close friendship online, and they start sort of FaceTiming each other and all that kind of stuff. And they have this really, really lovely relationship. His friends aren't sure that this is a good idea, because they're like, you know, this is a long distance relationship. How are you going to make it work? You can't fly from Florida to LA and back all the time. But anyway, so it's just about Jules and Matt's relationship blossoming, and about his coming out experience with his family, about the difficulties of being a gay teen in a family which doesn't accept you. There's a lot about food in this book. Because the family are Mexican, there's loads of Mexican food in this book, and it was making me like really hungry. And I love as well that the main character Jules is vegetarian, which is really refreshing, because you don't see vegetarian characters in books very often, or they don't talk about it. There's quite a lot of Spanish mixed in with the English in the book, and so I did Google Translate quite a lot of things, because I don't speak any Spanish at all. So that was quite cool to like have stuff to learn about as well. So yeah, this is like really cozy, lovely love story, and I think that it would be really helpful for any queer teens to read as well. And then the last book that I read was our book club choice for February, which we are coming to my house for tomorrow, and that was Small Pleasures by Clare Chambers. I bought this book a really long time ago when it was shortlisted for the Women's Prize for Fiction, and this is I'm only now getting got round to reading it. So this is following Jean, who is our main character, and Jean is a journalist. She lives with her mum. Her mum she's made out to be quite old, but honestly I don't know how old she is, because it's set in the 1950s and people were kind of older sooner in those days. But she's an older lady, and she's very kind of grumpy in particular, and she's very demanding of Jean's time. Like, she won't let Jean go out for the day and leave her. She won't let her stay out overnight with anybody. She's very like grumbly and complainy about everything. So she has quite a difficult life, and she has a sister. Jean has a sister who lives in, I think it's Kenya, and so she has this much more exciting life than Jean does, and she's sort of a bit unhappy really. And as I say, she's a journalist, and she comes across this woman who writes into the paper to say that her daughter was born by parthenogenesis, which basically means she had an immaculate conception. There was no man involved. And so Jean's editor says, yeah, by all means, like, go and look into this story and, find out. So the woman's called Gretchen. She has a husband called Howard and a daughter called Margaret. And Jean gets more and more entwined with their lives, and lines are crossed, really. And so we learn about sort of the story, and also the consequences of what Jean's finding out. So to start with, the first half of this book I loved the writing style. I loved the 1950s setting. I liked it was set in Britain in that age, and I just was really enjoying it. I was racing through. I think it took me 3 days to read this, and then the second half started getting not as good for me, and I'd say the last quarter was a disappointment, and so therefore I gave it 3.5 stars in the end, although I thought it was going to be like 4.5 stars to start off with. But I just was a bit disappointed with the second half. So yeah, so that was everything that I read. What I'm currently reading. So I only listened to 2 audiobooks in January, because I'm listening to Nicholas Nickelby by Charles Dickens at the moment, and that is a 34-hour audiobook, which is massive. I am over halfway through. That was our read-along project for January and February, so I've got till the end of Feb. I don't want to be listening till the end of Feb, because I really want to have other audiobooks before I go back into the next Dickens. Otherwise I can't really do Dickens for 2 years with no breaks. I need to have something interspersed with Dickens. So I'm listening to that, and I've just started reading Pet by Akwaeke Emezi, which is my first book for Blackathon, which I mentioned in my TBR for February. So on track so far. Pet is quite short. I didn't actually read hardly anything yesterday because I had a busy day. But yes, that's what I'm up to at the moment. So let me know, have you read any of these books? What are you reading at the moment? If you have read any of them, what are your thoughts? And if you would like to read Immune, let me know. I will put a link for if you wish to purchase that in the description box down below. And I hope you have a really lovely week, and I'll speak to you all soon. Bye.